Hey there, tonight we're stepping into a quiet museum. No rush and nothing you need to do, just calm art stories, low light and slow footsteps. If you feel sleepy, you can simply rest. We'll move gently, one quiet room at a time. The museum is very still tonight. The air inside is cool and even, the kind of air that doesn't move much, that has settled into the spaces between the walls and the display cases and simply rests there. The floors are wide stone, pale and smooth, and our footsteps are soft against them. The lighting above us is low and amber, the kind of light that does not demand anything from your eyes, that simply allows you to see without effort. There are no crowds here tonight, no voices echoing from distant galleries, no rush of people moving through doorways. Just the quiet and the low light and the slow, patient presence of very old things arranged carefully on walls and in cases, waiting to be looked at by anyone who has the time and the willingness to look. Tonight, we are spending our time with one person, one life, a life that stretched across most of the 15th century and well into the 16th, a life so full of curiosity and attention and quiet, persistent work that it is difficult to hold it all in mind at once. His name is Leonardo da Vinci. You have heard it before, almost certainly. You may have seen his most famous painting reproduced so many times that the original seems almost abstract, a symbol more than an object. But tonight, we are not going to rush past the famous things or reduce them to symbols. We are going to move through his world slowly, one room at a time, letting the paintings and the drawings and the notebooks and the materials speak at whatever pace they choose. There is no hurry. The night is long and quiet. Let us begin at the beginning. The first space we enter is a small room near the entrance of the museum. The walls here are a warm, sandy colour, something between pale ochre and old plaster, the colour of a sunlit wall in central Italy. There are a few framed reproductions of landscape drawings and one or two maps, their ink lines faded to a soft brown. The room smells faintly of old paper and something dry and mineral, like stone dust. It is a room that feels like the beginning of something, which is exactly what it is. Leonardo was born on the 15th of April in the year 1452. The place was in or near the town of Vinci, a small hilltop settlement in the Tuscan countryside, in the foothills between Florence and the sea. The region of Tuscany in the mid-15th century was a landscape of vineyards and olive groves climbing the hillsides, of rivers moving slowly through wide valley floors, of the particular quality of Italian light that shifts from pale and diffuse in winter to brilliant and concentrated in summer, turning everything it touches a slightly different gold depending on the hour of the day. His father was a man named Ser Piero da Vinci, a notary by profession, which in the Florence of that period meant a respectable and practically important person who drew up legal documents, managed contracts, and generally served the administrative needs of a city that ran on commerce and law. Leonardo's mother was a young woman named Caterina. The two were not married to each other, and Leonardo was born outside of wedlock. This was not an uncommon circumstance in 15th century Tuscany, but it had practical consequences. A boy born outside of marriage could not follow his father into the notarial profession. Certain guilds and certain civic roles were closed to him. In some ways, this limitation was a door shutting. In other ways, it may have been the thing that left other doors open. Leonardo was raised partly in his father's household in the town of Vinci, and partly with his grandfather Giovanni and his uncle Francesco. Francesco da Vinci was not much older than Leonardo himself, perhaps 15 years, and by many accounts the two had a warm and easy relationship. The uncle was a man who loved the countryside, who spent time outdoors, who knew the names of plants and the habits of animals. It is easy to imagine the two of them walking together along river paths in the early morning, the boy with his eyes wide open, noticing everything. Because Leonardo, from his earliest years, was someone who noticed things. Not just things that were unusual or dramatic, ordinary things seen with complete attention. The way water folds around a stone, the precise shape a starling makes against the sky when it banks in a turn, the colour of a shadow on a whitewashed wall at different times of day. These are not the observations of a child who is simply looking. They are the observations of a child who is genuinely trying to understand what is in front of them. We do not have direct accounts of his very earliest years, but we have what he left behind. And what he left behind suggests a childhood spent in close, sustained contact with the natural world of Tuscany, a world that would stay with him for the rest of his life and appear again and again in the backgrounds of his paintings. Mounted here in this first room in a simple dark frame is a reproduction of one of the earliest drawings attributed to Leonardo. It shows a wide Tuscan valley seen from a high vantage point. Rocky crags rise on one side, a river winds through the valley floor below. Farmland spreads across the middle distance divided into fields, and at the back, where land meets sky, the mountains dissolve into a pale haze that makes them seem less like solid things and more like the idea of mountains, something suggested rather than defined. A small label near the frame notes that this drawing was made in pen and ink on paper, that it carries on its surface a notation that has been read as the 5th of August, 1473, and that it is now held in the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence. If the date is correct, Leonardo would have been 21 years old when he made it. It is considered one of the earliest surviving drawings in his hand. What strikes you, looking at it, is not complexity. It is not a technically difficult drawing. What strikes you is the quality of the looking. The haze at the distant mountains is not accidental. It has been put there deliberately, the pen marks growing lighter and farther apart as the landscape recedes. The rocky crags on one side are rendered with quick, decisive strokes that capture their texture without labouring over it. The river below catches light in a way that the fields around it do not. These are observations. This is a person who has looked at this view, or a view like it, many times, and who understands not just how it appears, but how it works. The room is quiet. Let us stay here a little longer before we move on. There is a low bench along one wall, the kind of bench that invites you to sit and simply be in the room, rather than pass through it quickly. The light from the amber fixtures above is warm and steady. Outside, somewhere beyond the museum walls, the night is dark and still. But in here, we are in Tuscany, in the soft light of an Italian morning in 1473, and a young man is standing on a hillside, looking out at the valley below. When you are ready, we will walk on. The next space we enter is larger than the first. The ceilings here are higher, and the walls are the colour of old terracotta, a deep, warm orange red that makes the room feel enclosed and safe. like a workshop, which is exactly what this room is meant to evoke. Florence in the 1460s was extraordinary. It was one of the most consequential cities in Europe, a place where old money and new ideas had been combining for generations to produce something that no single word quite captures. What was happening in Florence in those years was the rediscovery of the ancient world, the absorption of classical learning and classical art into a living practice, and the production, through that process, of painting and sculpture and architecture that had not been seen anywhere in centuries. At the center of this was the Medici family. Cosimo de' Medici and his descendants, particularly his grandson Lorenzo, who would become known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, were patrons on a scale that shaped the entire cultural atmosphere of the city. Under their influence, Florence became a place where thinkers and artists and musicians and poets gathered, where ideas circulated freely, where a young person with genuine talent might find a path into a remarkable life if they were willing to work and if fortune was on their side. Ser Piero da Vinci was a practical man. He moved in professional circles that included some of the major artistic workshops of Florence. When he noticed that his son had an extraordinary ability to draw, he did what a practical Florentine father would do. He arranged for someone to look at the boy's work. The person he approached was a sculptor and painter named Andrea del Verrocchio, whose workshop on the Via Ghibellina was one of the most respected in the city. Verrocchio was a craftsman of unusual range. His workshop produced bronze sculpture, marble carving, gilded wooden objects, paintings, metal work, and decorated practical objects of all kinds. It was a workshop in the full Renaissance sense, which meant that the line between fine art and applied craft was blurry and unimportant. What mattered was skill and attention, and the ability to work in multiple materials with equal facility. Ser Piero brought some of Leonardo's drawings. Verrocchio looked at them. He agreed to take the boy on as an apprentice. Leonardo was perhaps 14 or 15 years old. The apprenticeship system of 15th century Florence was thorough and demanding. A new apprentice began at the very bottom, learning by observation and by the repetition of small tasks. He would grind pigments, running the raw coloured stones and earths across a smooth stone slab with a heavy muller until they became a fine powder. He would prepare wooden panels, applying layer after layer of gesso, the white, chalky primer that smoothed the surface and made it ready to receive paint. He would clean brushes, stretch and prime canvas, run errands, observe the work of the more senior members of the workshop, and gradually, over months and years, begin to assist with preparatory work on actual commissions. In the cases along the walls here, there are objects that belong to this world. A marble grinding slab, its surface stained faintly with ochre and umber. A few panels in different stages of gesso preparation, their surfaces white and smooth and faintly luminous. Small bowls containing earth pigments, the raw colours of the 15th century palette, the warm gold of yellow ochre, the reddish brown of burnt sienna, the cool darkness of bone black, the clear blue-green of malachite. These are not romantic objects. They are the materials of a craft. They are what a painter worked with before the painting began, and they required real skill to use well. The grinding had to be thorough. The gesso had to be applied evenly. The pigments had to be mixed in the right proportions with the right binding medium, oil or egg yolk, or a combination. depending on the technique being used. Getting any of these things wrong could ruin a painting before it was started. Leonardo was a good apprentice. He was attentive and quick, and already possessed of skills in drawing that were, by any account, unusual. He absorbed everything the workshop had to teach and then, gradually, began to go further. One of the most often told stories from this period concerns a painting of the baptism of Christ that Verrocchio had begun. The work required multiple figures, and Verrocchio assigned the painting of one of the angels to his young apprentice. The story, as told by the art historian Giorgio Vasari, writing a generation later, is that when Verrocchio saw what Leonardo had made of the angel, he laid down his own brush and refused to paint again, recognizing that his student had surpassed him. The story has certainly been polished in the retelling, but the painting itself survives, and it is possible to look at it today in the Uffizi. The angel attributed to Leonardo does have a quality that is different from the rest of the work, a softness in the face, a depth to the modelling, a sense of inner life that the other figures, competently made as they are, do not quite achieve. Whether this caused Verrocchio any particular feeling is something we cannot know, but it says something true about the quality that was already visible in the young Leonardo. There is another drawing here, pinned gently to a low board near the window. It is a study of drapery, a piece of cloth arranged over a seated figure, each fold described with extraordinary precision. A small note nearby explains that this type of drawing was common workshop practice in the Verrocchio tradition, that students made studies of this kind to understand how fabric behaved, how the light moved across the ridges and gathered in the valleys between them. But what sets this particular drawing apart, if it is Leonardo's, is the quality of the observation. The folds are not generic, they are specific. They are the exact folds that this piece of cloth in this arrangement made on this particular day, seen with complete attention. This is something that Leonardo was already doing, or beginning to do, in these early years. He was not learning formulas. He was learning to look, to see the actual thing in front of him and render not a symbol of it, but its specific, unrepeatable reality. He remained in Verrocchio's workshop for perhaps 6 or 7 years. By 1472 he was enrolled in the Painters' Guild of Florence, which meant he was officially qualified as an independent artist. But he seems to have stayed on with Verrocchio for some time after that, working alongside the older artist rather than immediately setting out on his own. The room is warm, the light on the terracotta walls is steady and soft. There is a quality of industry here, of quiet, purposeful work being done without drama. Let us continue. We pass through a wide doorway into a longer gallery, its floor pale stone, its walls a lighter colour now, the cool off-white of a plastered studio wall. The windows on the far side are high and narrow and look out onto nothing but dark sky. This is a room of early independent work. By the mid-1470s, Leonardo was making paintings of his own. He was receiving commissions, working on ideas that were entirely his, and already beginning to demonstrate the qualities that would define his mature work. The paintings from this period are not yet the fully realized things of his later career, but they are already unusual, already distinctly his. One of the most beautiful of these early works is the Annunciation, now in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. The subject is a traditional one. The moment from the Gospel of Luke when the angel Gabriel appears to the young Mary to tell her she will bear a child. It had been painted many times before Leonardo's version, and would be painted many times after, but his interpretation has a quality that distinguishes it from almost everything that came before. The setting is a garden beside a stone building. On the left side of the painting, the angel kneels in the grass, its large wings still spread, as if it has only just arrived and has not yet folded them. The wings are studied from observation based on the actual structure of large bird wings rather than simply the conventional feathered appendages that earlier angels wore. On the right, Mary sits beside an elaborate carved reading stand, her body turned slightly, her right hand raised in a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. Between them, the garden is full of detail, grass and flowers rendered with botanical precision. A low stone wall at the edge of the garden, and beyond the wall a landscape that extends into a distance filled with haze, water catching light at the bottom of a valley, mountains rising behind it and dissolving into a pale blue-grey at the horizon. It is that distant landscape that many people find themselves drawn back to. The mountains are not simply small versions of nearby mountains. They have been changed by the distance. Their colours have shifted toward blue. Their edges have softened. The atmosphere between them and the viewer has accumulated into something you can almost feel, a sense of actual air, actual miles, actual distance. This effect has a name, aerial perspective, sometimes called atmospheric perspective. It refers to the way that the air itself changes the appearance of things seen through it from a distance, shifting their colours toward blue and grey and softening their edges. Leonardo understood this principle with unusual clarity, and he applied it here with a subtlety that was well ahead of most of his contemporaries. A small label near the reproduction reads that the Annunciation was painted on wood panel in tempera and possibly some oil, that it dates to approximately 1472 to 1475, and that it is now in the Galleria degli Uffizi in Florence. The handling of the distant landscape and the careful study of the angel's wings suggest an artist already moving beyond the conventions of his training. Standing before this painting in the quiet of this room, what you feel is a kind of peace. The garden is still. The light is soft and even. The angel does not look urgent, it looks attentive and calm, the way someone looks when they are carrying a message they believe is good news and are not in any hurry to leave once it has been delivered. And Mary looks composed, the face of someone who is genuinely taking in what she has just been told and thinking about it quietly, rather than performing any emotion. It is a painting about a moment of stillness inside an extraordinary event, about the way very large things can arrive softly. Leonardo also made several paintings of the Madonna and Child during these early years. It was a subject he returned to throughout his career, and the early versions are notable for a quality of warmth and physical reality that was not always present in earlier treatments of the subject. His Madonnas are not symbolic presences. They are women, specific women, with faces that seem to have been observed from life, holding children who move and reach and look around with the unself-conscious physicality of real infants. There are a few drawings in this room related to these early Madonna studies. A sketch in pen and ink, showing a woman leaning forward slightly, her arms cradling a weight that is not yet drawn, but whose presence you can feel in the curve of her posture. Another drawing, in red and black chalk, showing the head of a young woman looking slightly downward, her expression composed and inward. These are preparatory drawings, working drawings, the kind of thing Leonardo made not to show anyone, but to think through a problem, to understand a face or a gesture before committing it to the painted surface. The room is quiet and still. Outside the high windows, the night continues. One more thing to note before we move on. In 1481, Leonardo received a commission for a large altarpiece from the monastery of San Donato, a Scopeto, outside Florence. The subject was the adoration of the Magi, the scene of the three kings arriving to honor the newborn Christ. Leonardo began the work with great energy. The underdrawing and the early layers of paint are extraordinary in their ambition, a swirling composition of figures and architectural ruins and rearing horses, organized around the central image of the Madonna and Child, with a complexity and dynamism that was genuinely new. And then he left Florence. In 1482 he moved to Milan. The altarpiece remained exactly as it was when he left it, the painted underdrawing complete, but the final layers of colour never applied. It is still in that state today in the Uffizi, brown and ghostly, and full of the energy of an idea that was never fully resolved. There is something beautiful about it in this unfinished state. You can see the thinking, the way the composition is organized, the movement of figures in space, the underlying logic of how the eye is meant to travel through the scene. It is like looking at a building with its walls removed, the structure completely exposed. Everything is there except the final skin of paint that would have made it legible as a finished work. The room is still. Let us move forward. Through a tall archway we enter a room that is noticeably grander than the ones we have passed through. Higher ceilings, dark panelling on the lower walls, and above the panelling pale plaster that reflects the light softly. This is the room of Milan, of the court of Ludovico Sforza, and of the 17 years that may represent the most productive and sustained period of Leonardo's entire working life. In approximately 1482, Leonardo composed a letter to Ludovico Sforza, the ruler of Milan. The letter is one of the most remarkable documents of self-presentation in the history of Western art, not because it is modest, but because of what it chooses to emphasize. Leonardo described himself primarily as an engineer. He wrote about portable bridges that could be assembled quickly in the field and dismantled just as quickly. He described techniques for attacking fortified positions, for draining moats, for moving artillery across difficult terrain. He mentioned designs for armoured vehicles and devices for protecting soldiers under fire. He discussed his abilities in architecture and his knowledge of music. Then, almost at the end of the letter, he noted, almost as an afterthought, that he could also paint, and that his abilities in that area were equal to anyone else who might be considered for such commissions. This is a remarkable thing. A painter of Leonardo's quality, presenting himself as an engineer, with painting as a secondary credential. But it reflects something true about how he understood himself, not as a specialist in any one domain, but as someone whose fundamental interest was in understanding how things worked in all domains simultaneously. Painting was one way of pursuing that understanding. Engineering was another. So was music. So was anatomy. So was the study of flowing water. Ludovico Sforza was a man of considerable ambition and genuine cultural interest. He accepted Leonardo's proposal. Leonardo moved to Milan and would remain there for approximately 17 years, the longest continuous period he spent in any single place as an adult. The court of Milan was different from the Florentine Republic in important ways. It was a formal court, organized around a single ruler with absolute authority, with all the ceremony and hierarchy and political complexity that implied. There were rituals to observe and courtiers to navigate, and the expectations of a patron who might change his mind or delay payment without any obligation to explain himself. But the court also provided something that Florence had not offered in the same sustained way: security and support over a long period. In Milan, Leonardo had a workshop, assistants, resources, and the freedom to pursue multiple projects simultaneously without having to worry about where the next commission was coming from. In the cases here, there are several objects that speak to the range of Leonardo's Milan years. A small bronze horse on a wooden base, its muscles carefully modelled, its pose suspended in the moment of a stride. A reproduction of an architectural drawing showing a domed central plan church in plan and elevation, the lines precise and confident. A page of musical notation copied in a careful hand. And there is a reproduction of a drawing of a rearing horse, made in silver point on prepared paper, the metallic line catching the light at a very slight angle. A label near it notes that this is believed to be one of many studies Leonardo made for the Gran Cavallo, the great horse, a monumental equestrian statue commissioned by Ludovico Sforza in honor of his father Francesco. The statue was to have been the largest bronze ever cast, a horse of truly extraordinary scale that would have announced to the world the power and ambition of the Sforza dynasty. Leonardo spent years preparing for this project. He made hundreds of drawings, studying horses from every angle, in every gait and posture, understanding the distribution of weight across the skeleton, the way muscle moved beneath skin during the various phases of walking and cantering and rearing. He made studies of specific horses in the Sforza stables, noting their names and their individual characteristics. He built a full-scale clay model of the horse, which was displayed in the courtyard of the Sforza castle, and attracted admiration from everyone who saw it. And then the project was interrupted. In 1499, French forces invaded the Duchy of Milan. Ludovico Sforza fled. The bronze that had been gathered for the casting of the horse was melted down and used for cannon. The clay model, left exposed, was damaged by French archers who used it for target practice, and it did not survive. It is a quiet loss, not dramatic, just the way that history interrupts long, patient work. Leonardo continued. The Milan years were years of enormous intellectual productivity across all of his interests simultaneously. He was working on the notebooks with increasing intensity. He was studying anatomy, working with the permission of the Hospital of Santa Maria Nuova to observe and eventually to dissect human bodies. He was investigating the behavior of flowing water. He was thinking about birds and flight. He was designing stage machinery for court spectacles. He was playing the lyre at court and teaching music to young people in the households of Milanese nobles. And he was painting. The most important painting of the Milan years, perhaps the most important painting of Leonardo's entire career in terms of its historical significance, is The Last Supper. Let us move through the next doorway, which opens into a room that is larger than any we have visited tonight, with high ceilings and bare walls. At the far end, the entire wall is covered by a large reproduction of the painting, lit from below with a very soft, directed light. Leonardo painted the Last Supper on the wall of the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie in Milan, the dining room of a Dominican monastery. He worked on it between approximately 1495 and 1498, on commission from Ludovico Sforza. The painting covers an entire wall, measuring roughly 9 meters wide and 4.5 meters tall. The subject is the meal described in the Gospel of John, the final evening Jesus shared with his 12 disciples before his arrest. Many painters had depicted this scene before. The conventional arrangement was to show the disciples seated along one side of a long table, with Judas often isolated on the near side, facing the viewer. The mood was typically devotional and calm, the moment chosen usually the institution of the Eucharist, a moment of ritual and ceremony. Leonardo chose a different moment entirely. He depicted the instant after Jesus has just spoken the words that one of those present will betray him, the moment of the announcement. And he showed what happened to 12 different people in the same instant upon hearing those words, each one reacting according to his own character, his own fears, his own relationship to what had just been said. The painting is, among other things, an extraordinary study in human response. The 12 disciples are arranged in 4 groups of 3, and within each group a small drama of gesture and expression unfolds. Some lean forward, some pull back, some reach toward each other seeking confirmation or denial, some look directly at Jesus, others look away. Some gestures are expansive, arms thrown wide, hands pressed to chest. Others are small and contained, a slight turn of the head, a hand barely raised. At the center of all this, perfectly still, is the figure of Jesus. His hands rest open on the table, palms upward. His head is bowed slightly. The light from the 3 windows behind him frames his figure against the pale sky outside. He is the fixed point around which everything else moves. The composition of the room in the painting is as important as the figures within it. Leonardo designed the perspective so that the lines of the ceiling beams, the tapestries on the walls, and the windows behind the table all converge toward the head of Jesus. The viewer's eye is drawn constantly back to that central, still figure. You cannot look away for long without being pulled back. A small note near the reproduction explains that the Last Supper is tempera and mixed media on a prepared wall surface, that Leonardo used an experimental technique that allowed him to work more slowly than traditional fresco required, applying paint in layers on a dry wall rather than on to wet plaster, as fresco demands. This technique proved less durable, and the painting began to deteriorate within decades of its completion. It has been subject to numerous restorations over the centuries. The deterioration is part of the painting's history now, as much a part of it as the original making. Within Leonardo's lifetime, observers were already noting damage to the surface. Over the following centuries, the paintings suffered flooding, layers of overpaint by restorers with varying levels of skill and sensitivity, and during the Second World War, a bombing raid that destroyed the roof and walls of the refectory on all sides, while leaving, against all probability, the painted wall itself substantially intact. What we see today in Santa Maria delle Grazie is both Leonardo's work and the accumulated history of 5 centuries of damage and repair and loss and recovery. It is a very human kind of survival. But even through all of that, even in reproduction in this quiet room, the composition speaks. The long table, the gathered figures, the quality of attention in each face, the still center. The room is very large and very quiet. The reproduction fills the wall completely. Let us stand here for a while. There is no hurry at all. When we are ready, we will move on. The doorway to the left leads into a narrower room, more intimate, its walls a soft amber color that is warm and welcoming. This is the room devoted to the portraits. Leonardo's portraits are few in number, perhaps 4 or 5 that can be securely attributed to him from the Milan period, but they represent a transformation in what portraiture could be. The convention in Italian portraiture before Leonardo had tended toward the profile view, the subject shown from the side, presented flat against a neutral background, turned away from the viewer. This was a formal pose, dignified and monumental, derived partly from the tradition of ancient Roman coins and medals. The subject was presented as a type, a noblewoman, a condottiere, a member of a ruling family, as much as a person. Their individuality was present in their features, but their interiority, their sense of having thoughts and feelings happening right now, was not generally sought. Leonardo changed this. His portrait subjects face you, or nearly face you. They are caught in 3/4 view, turned at an angle that creates the sense of interrupted movement, as if they have just looked up from something they were doing or just turned their head toward a sound. They seem to be in the middle of a thought or a moment. They are not posing. They are simply present. The most remarkable of these portraits is the lady with an ermine, now held at the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow, Poland. The reproduction here is very close to the original in size and colour, and standing before it in the amber light, it is possible to understand why scholars have returned to this painting again and again. The subject is believed to be Cecilia Gallerani, a young woman of considerable intelligence and cultural accomplishment, who was, for a period, a companion to Ludovico Sforza. She is shown in 3/4 view, her body turned to the left, her head turned slightly back to the right, as if she has just registered something happening just beyond the edge of the frame. She holds in her arms a white ermine, a small animal whose dark eyes are bright and alert, its own body turned in the same direction as hers. The figure is alive in a way that earlier portraits rarely managed. The turn of her neck, the quality of her expression, composed and calm and just slightly amused, or perhaps simply attentive, it is not possible to say exactly. The slight tension in her arms where they hold the ermine. All of these things together create a sense not of a person who has been placed in front of a painter and told to be still, but of a person who has been caught in a specific and unrepeatable moment of her actual life. A small label near the reproduction reads that the lady with an ermine is oil on walnut panel, that it was painted around 1489 to 1490, and that it is now in the Czartoryski Museum in Krakow. The ermine held by the figure was a symbol associated with purity and with the Sforza court. The hands in this painting deserve particular attention. Leonardo studied hands throughout his entire career, and the hands here are among the finest he ever made. The long fingers hold the ermine gently, but with clear intent. The light falls across the knuckles from one side, picking out the slight curve of each joint, suggesting the bone structure beneath the skin. The tendons are just barely visible under the surface. These are not generic hands placed at the end of generic arms to complete the composition. They are specific hands, observed and rendered with the kind of attention that makes them feel present, almost three-dimensional, in a way that draws the eye as strongly as the face. Also in this room is a reproduction of another portrait from roughly the same period called La Belle Ferronnière, the beautiful ironsmith's wife, a name whose origin is somewhat obscure and probably not accurate. The subject here is shown in a more frontal view, with a stone parapet in the foreground, creating a slight sense of distance between her and the viewer. Her gaze is directed not quite at you, but to one side, as if she has glanced briefly towards something and will return her attention forward in a moment. Her expression is composed and a little guarded. The light on her face is very even and very soft. The shadows built up so gradually that there is no clear point where light ends and shadow begins. This technique, the gradual building of shadow through thin, translucent layers, was something Leonardo was developing intensively during these years. He was working toward an approach to painting that would eventually receive its own name, sfumato. The word comes from the Italian for smoke, and it describes the quality Leonardo was seeking, the way a form seems to dissolve at its edges in the same way that smoke dissolves in still air. Not a hard line separating the form from its background, but a gradual, almost imperceptible transition. Achieving this effect required painting in very thin, barely there layers, each one slightly darker or lighter or more coloured than the one beneath it, each one needing to dry before the next was applied. It was an extraordinarily slow process. A single session of painting might add only a tiny fractional degree of depth to a shadow, but the cumulative effect of dozens of such sessions was a surface that appeared to have real depth, as if the form you were looking at was not paint on a flat surface, but an actual, three-dimensional thing occupying actual space. The room is warm and still. The amber light falls softly on the reproductions, and the figures in them look outward with their composed, attentive expressions, caught in their specific moments, patient and present. Let us stay here for a moment longer. There is no hurry. The night is long and quiet, and the paintings are in no rush. When we are ready, we will pass through a doorway at the back of this room and into a space that is completely different in character, cooler and lighter, with display cases along all four walls rather than paintings. This is the room of the notebooks. The notebooks of Leonardo da Vinci are among the most extraordinary documents in the history of human thought. The sheer range of subjects they cover is almost impossible to summarize without making the list seem like an exaggeration. Painting and drawing, of course, but also anatomy in extraordinary detail, the behavior of flowing water, the movement of air and the principles of flight, geology and the formation of mountains, botany and the structure of plants, optics and the behavior of light, architecture and the design of buildings, engineering and the design of machines, music theory, astronomy, the properties of various materials, mathematics and geometry, the physiology of speech and sound, the nature of the soul. Not all of these are covered with equal depth. Some of the entries in the notebooks are brief observations or quick sketches, a thought recorded before it dissolved. Others are extended, systematic investigations that run across many pages, with drawings and calculations and written analysis building on each other over what must have been months or years of return visits to the same question. Over the course of his lifetime, Leonardo filled somewhere in the region of 10,000 pages. Of these, approximately 7,000 have survived. They are scattered now across collections in several countries, in libraries and archives in Milan and Florence and Venice and Madrid and Windsor and Paris. Each collection has its own character, reflecting the particular range of questions Leonardo was pursuing at whatever period the pages were made. In the cases along the walls here, there are careful facsimile reproductions of pages from several of these collections, printed at the original scale on paper, that has been aged to approximate the texture and colour of the originals. One case holds pages from what is known as the Codex Leicester, a collection of 36 double-sided sheets, devoted primarily to the study of water, geology, and related questions. Now, in private ownership, these pages are covered in Leonardo's mirror script, written from right to left in the small, precise hand that is immediately recognizable once you know what to look for. The drawings on these pages show water in motion, currents flowing around obstacles, the way a jet of water falling into a pool creates concentric rings. The spiraling patterns of a whirlpool, the movement of a river as it curves, and the way the current concentrates on the outside of a bend. These are not illustrations of known facts. They are observations. Leonardo is watching water and drawing what he sees, and then asking why. What principle causes water to move faster at the centre of a whirlpool? What determines the angle at which rings spread from a disturbance? How does a current behave differently depending on the shape of the channel it flows through? The questions are not rhetorical. He genuinely wants to know the answers, and he is pursuing them through the direct observation of actual water. A note near this case explains that the Codex Leicester was acquired by a private collector in the early 1990s and is occasionally exhibited publicly. The paper is slightly yellowed with age, and the ink has faded to a warm brown, but the line quality of the drawings remains clear, precise and unhurried. Another case holds pages from the Windsor Royal Collection, the largest single repository of Leonardo's drawings, now held at Windsor Castle in England. The pages here show anatomical studies, drawings of the human body so detailed and accurate that they represent the most advanced anatomical illustration produced anywhere in the world before the 17th century. Leonardo is believed to have dissected more than 30 human bodies over the course of his career, working with the cooperation of hospitals in Florence, Milan, and Rome. He also dissected animals, comparing their internal structures to those of humans, looking for the underlying logic of biological design. He made drawings of the skeleton, showing bones from multiple angles and with precise attention to the joints between them. He made drawings of the musculature, showing the muscles in layers, peeling back one layer to reveal the next, developing a system of cross-sectional illustration that allowed a three-dimensional structure to be represented on a flat page. He studied the heart and described its valves and chambers with a precision that would not be matched until the modern period. He studied the eye and made observations about how light was focused and how the retinal image was formed. He studied the brain, cutting sections through it and drawing what he saw. He made drawings of a fetus in the womb that are, by any standard, extraordinary for their accuracy and their compassionate attention. Many of his observations were confirmed by later science, sometimes much later science, in some cases not until the 20th century. This was possible because the notebooks were not published. They dispersed gradually after his death and were only fully examined by scholars over many centuries. Scientists working in the 17th and 18th centuries made discoveries independently that Leonardo had already made and recorded in pages that had not yet been read. That is a thought worth sitting with for a moment. The most detailed anatomical observations of the Italian Renaissance, locked away in private notebooks, unavailable to the world, confirmed only centuries later by people who had no idea they were covering ground already covered. In a smaller case near the centre of the room, there is a reproduction of perhaps the single most reproduced drawing in history, the Vitruvian Man. It is a study of human proportions made around 1490, showing a male figure in two superimposed positions, arms stretched straight out to the sides and legs together inscribed in a square, and arms and legs spread wide, inscribed in a circle. The two positions are drawn over each other on the same figure, so that the man appears to have 4 arms and 4 legs, each set of limbs reaching toward a different point on the circumscribed geometry. A small label near the reproduction notes that this drawing is pen and ink on paper, that it was made around 1490, that it is held at the Gallery dell'Accademia in Venice, and that Leonardo made it in connection with his study of the architectural writings of the ancient Roman author Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, who had described ideal human proportions in his 1st century text on architecture. The drawing is often reproduced as an emblem of the Renaissance, of the idea that the human body and mathematical harmony are related, that the form of a person contains within it geometric perfections. But looking at it quietly in this case, it is also simply a very beautiful drawing of a man standing in a room of clear light, arms wide, feet set, looking directly outward. There is something very still about the figure despite the doubled limbs and the inscribed geometry. He is not moving. He is at the centre of his own geometry, simply being there. Let us move through this room slowly. There is more to see. In a case near the window there are pages from the Madrid codices, 2 notebooks that were thought to have been lost for centuries and were discovered in 1966 in the Biblioteca Nacional de España in Madrid, misfiled under the name of an unrelated author. Their rediscovery was significant because they contained information about Leonardo's technical investigations that had not been available to scholars. One of the Madrid notebooks is devoted largely to the study of mechanical principles, with drawings of gears and pulleys and levers and weights, all accompanied by explanatory notes that approach mechanics with the same systematic observation that Leonardo brought to everything else. Another case holds pages that appear to be early drafts of a text on painting. Leonardo planned, over many years, to write a formal treatise on the art of painting. He collected observations and principles over decades, intending to organize them into a systematic work. He never completed this project, but the notes that survive were gathered together after his death by a student named Giovanni Paolo Lomazzo, and a version of this material was eventually published in the 17th century under the title Treatise on Painting. Scholars have spent centuries working to understand which parts of this published text are close to Leonardo's actual words and which parts have been added or altered. The room is cool and still. The reproduced pages in their cases are very quiet, their mirror script patient and unhurried. What you feel in this room is the texture of a mind, not the formal output of that mind, the finished paintings that hang in museums, but the actual process. The questions asked, the observations made, the connections drawn between things that seem unrelated until someone with sufficient breadth of attention sees the underlying principle they share. It is a very particular feeling, being in the presence of thinking, being close to the actual work of a mind engaged with the world. Let us rest here for a moment. The light is low and the room is very still. Outside, somewhere beyond the museum walls, the night continues. But in here, the questions on the reproduced pages keep asking themselves quietly in the amber dark. When we are ready, we will move on. Through a narrow doorway we enter a room that is cool and white, its ceiling slightly lower than the rooms before, the light here closer to the cool grey-white of a north-facing window. This is the room devoted to anatomy, to the study of the body. We have touched on Leonardo's anatomical work in the notebook room, but it deserves its own space, its own time. The drawings in this room are large reproductions of works from the Windsor Royal Collection, printed at approximately the same size as the originals, and they cover the walls from eye level to shoulder height on all four sides. Even without knowing what you are looking at in detail, the effect is one of extraordinary precision and care, line after line placed with complete attention, form after form described from the direct observation of actual bodies. Leonardo's anatomical investigations began during the Milan years and continued throughout the rest of his career. He worked in hospital settings when possible, dissecting bodies that had been donated or made available to him. He made drawings of what he saw, not just recording the appearances, but trying to understand the systems, the way the body worked as a whole. A large reproduction here shows the shoulder and arm, the muscles of the rotator cuff and the deltoid, and the various muscles of the upper arm drawn from 3 different angles on the same page. Below each drawing, Leonardo's mirror script notes describe the function of each muscle, what movement it enables, how it relates to the muscles above and below it. The page has the quality of a technical manual combined with a work of art. The drawing is beautiful, the line is clean and precise and confident, and yet it is also clearly functional, designed to communicate specific anatomical information. A smaller reproduction nearby shows the hand, bones and muscles together, the complex architecture of the wrist laid bare. Leonardo was fascinated by hands throughout his career, which perhaps explains why the hands in his paintings have a quality that is different from those of his contemporaries. He knew what was inside. He knew the structure that the skin covered, the way the tendons connected to the bones, the way the muscles of the forearm controlled the movements of the fingers. When he painted a hand, he was not painting a symbol of a hand. He was painting something he understood completely. He also made remarkable drawings of the heart. His studies of the cardiac valves are particularly noted by historians of medicine. He observed that the aortic valve opened and closed with each heartbeat, and he made drawings that show the valve from multiple angles, in both open and closed positions. He also correctly described certain aspects of how blood flowed through the heart at a time when the standard understanding of blood circulation was still based on the ancient theories of Galen, which would not be fundamentally challenged until William Harvey's work in the 17th century. On the far wall of this room there is a single large reproduction of one of the most affecting of all Leonardo's anatomical drawings, a study of an old man and a young man together, the old man seated and looking downward, the young man shown in profile. The drawing is accompanied by notes in which Leonardo discusses the differences between young and old bodies, the way age changes the distribution of flesh and the visibility of structure, what it means for a body to age well or badly. It is one of the few places in the notebooks where Leonardo's writing takes on a quality that is not purely observational, but also philosophical. A quiet meditation on what a human body is and what happens to it over time. A small label near this reproduction notes that it is from the Windsor Royal Collection, that it was made in red chalk and ink, and that it dates from approximately 1508 to 1513. Looking at it in the quiet of this room, what you feel is not clinical, it is compassionate. This is a person who has looked at many human bodies, in life and in death, and who understands them with unusual depth, and who has not lost, through that understanding, any of his feeling for the people who inhabit them. The room is very still. The light is cool and even. Let us move on. Through a connecting space whose walls are lined with drawings of plants, botanical studies made with the same precision Leonardo brought to anatomy, their veins traced, their arrangements across the stem noted, we pass into a room that is darker than the others. Its walls are deep, quiet blue. This is the room devoted to flight. Leonardo returned to the question of flight throughout his career. His notebooks contain drawings and calculations related to flying machines that span decades, from the early Milan years through the later Italian period and perhaps beyond. The fundamental question he was pursuing was one of the most basic questions you can ask. How does a bird stay in the air? He watched birds with extraordinary attention, sitting outdoors for long periods to observe them, noting the precise angle of the wing at different points in the downstroke, the way the bird adjusted its posture in response to changes in the wind, the way a large bird could remain aloft for extended periods without flapping, gliding on currents of air that were not visible but whose presence the bird clearly detected and used. He made many hundreds of drawings related to these observations. Some show the structure of bird wings in close anatomical detail, the bone and tendon arrangement that allowed the wing to spread and fold and adjust. Others show the wing at different phases of the flapping cycle, the leading edge cutting into the air, the trailing edge following. Still others show the behavior of air itself, the currents and eddies that form around a moving wing, the way air presses upward against the undersurface and flows faster over the curved upper surface, generating the pressure differential that we now call lift. Leonardo did not have the mathematical framework that would eventually explain lift in formal terms, but he understood the principle. He observed it in birds and he tried to replicate it in his designs. Several of those designs are reproduced here, mounted on the dark blue walls in cases with low lighting. One shows what he called an ornithopter, a device whose pilot lay face down and operated a complex system of levers and cables with both arms and both legs to drive a pair of large wings through a flapping motion. The design is detailed and systematic, the dimensions carefully calculated, the forces involved thought through carefully. Whether Leonardo believed this device would actually work is a matter that scholars have debated. He was capable of designing things he knew were speculative, as thought experiments or as ways of working through the principles involved without necessarily believing a practical flying machine was imminent, but he was also genuinely hoping in some part of himself that a human being might eventually achieve flight. He returned to the question too many times and with too much sustained attention for it to have been purely theoretical. He also made drawings that look, to modern eyes, quite different from the ornithopter. Some of his later studies in this area are based not on flapping flight, but on gliding, on the possibility of using a large fixed surface to ride on air currents without the need for any powered wing movement. These drawings are, in their basic principle, closer to what would eventually be achieved in the history of aviation. And there is one drawing in particular that many people find surprising. A pyramidal structure, open at the bottom, intended to be made of cloth stretched over a wooden frame, large enough to allow a person suspended from it to fall from any height without injury. It is a parachute. In 2000, a skydiver used a reconstruction of Leonardo's design built to the specifications in the notebooks and reported that it performed exactly as described. A small note near the reproduction of this drawing says simply that this is a facsimile page from one of Leonardo's notebooks, likely from around 1485, showing a device for safe descent from a height, accompanied by a brief note in mirror script giving approximate dimensions. The room is quiet and very dark. The drawings on the walls are lit only by the directed lights in their cases, everything else falling into the surrounding blue. There is something appropriate about the darkness in this room. These are ideas that were made in private, worked out on pages that few people would ever see. Ideas that belonged to a mind pursuing questions the world was not yet ready to answer. Let us stay here a moment. There is no hurry. The air in this room is still. When we are ready, we will pass through a doorway on the far side and into a room whose wall, we can see from here, is dominated by a single large image. This is the room of the Mona Lisa. It is the most famous painting in the world. That fame is so complete, so total, so accumulated over centuries that it has become, in some ways, an obstacle to actually seeing the painting. The image has been reproduced so many times on posters and postcards and coffee mugs and the covers of countless books that encountering it directly, without the noise of all that reproduction, requires a deliberate act of setting things aside and simply looking. Tonight, in this quiet museum, in this low amber light, let us try. The painting is small. The original, now held in the Louvre in Paris, measures approximately 77 centimeters tall and 53 centimeters wide. When people see it for the first time in person, they are sometimes surprised by how small it is. In reproduction, it tends to seem larger, more monumental. In person, it is intimate, something you stand close to. The reproduction here is printed at exactly the original scale, mounted in a simple dark frame, lit from one side with a very soft, low light. Standing before it in the quiet of this room, it is possible to look at it without the accumulated weight of everything that has been said and written about it. The subject is a woman, seated in three-quarter view. Her hands are folded in her lap. She faces outward, toward the viewer, though her gaze is directed not quite at you, but somewhere just past you or through you, a quality that is part of what makes the painting feel alive. Behind her, on both sides, a landscape extends into a misty, mountainous distance. A winding road or path can be made out on one side, and what appears to be a bridge crosses the landscape somewhere in the middle ground. The sky is pale and the mountains are dissolved in haze at the back. La Gioconda, which carries both the family name and an echo of the Italian word for happiness or contentment. Leonardo is thought to have begun the work around 1503, when he was back in Florence following the end of the Milan period, and to have continued working on it for years afterward. It may have been with him when he moved to France late in his life, still being refined, still not quite finished by his own estimation. The painting's most discussed feature is the expression of the subject. It is not a simple smile. It is something more subtle and more variable, a slight upward movement at the corners of the mouth, a quality of reserve in the eyes, something that seems to change slightly depending on where exactly you focus your gaze, whether at the mouth or the eyes or the space between them. Leonardo achieved this partly through the technique of sfumato, which we discussed in the portrait room, here applied with greater refinement than anywhere else in his work. The corners of the mouth and the corners of the eyes are the features of a face most sensitive to expression, the places where the smallest change of muscle produces the largest change of meaning. By leaving these areas slightly soft, their edges dissolved rather than defined, Leonardo made the expression legible in multiple ways at once. Your own perception of what you are seeing contributes to what you see. The technique required applying paint in extremely thin layers, each one so thin as to be barely translucent on its own. Infrared analysis of the painting has suggested that Leonardo used dozens of such layers in certain areas, building up the modeling of the face and hands with a patience that was extraordinary, even by the standards of his own careful practice. The process could not be hurried. Each layer needed to dry completely before the next could be applied. This is part of why the painting took years. The background landscape is as carefully made as the figure. Aerial perspective is used with great subtlety. The colors of the distant mountains shifted toward blue-gray, their forms softened by layers of very thin glaze that simulate the effect of actual atmosphere. The landscape is not a specific, identifiable place. It is imaginary or perhaps assembled from many observations combined into a single, invented scene. It has the quality of a landscape you might find at the edge of a dream, recognizable and yet not quite real. A small label near the painting reads that the Mona Lisa is oil on poplar panel, that it was begun around 1503 and worked on for many years, and that it is now in the permanent collection of the Louvre in Paris, where it has been held since the 18th century. It was acquired by the French King Francis I sometime before or after Leonardo's death, and has been in French royal and national collections ever since. Standing here in the quiet room, looking at the painting at its actual scale, what you are left with when you set aside everything that has been said and written about it is this: a woman sitting still, looking outward. The light on her hands, very soft and even, the misty distance behind her. An expression that does not resolve into a single, certain thing, a quality of presence. It is a painting about looking, about the act of looking at another person and finding that they are more complex, more interior, more genuinely present than any description can fully capture. That is not a simple thing to convey in paint. Leonardo spent years trying. Let us stay in this room for a while. The light is very soft. There is no hurry at all. The painting will wait. When we are ready, we will move on. Through a side door, we enter a smaller room, long and narrow, with the quality of a corridor that has become a gallery. The walls here are a warm cream, and the objects in the cases are smaller than in the previous rooms. This is a room of preparatory work, of the space between thinking and making. Leonardo made preparatory drawings for almost everything he painted, not just quick sketches, but fully worked out studies of individual figures or details, often as large as the final painted version or close to it. These drawings were an essential part of his process, the way he worked out problems before committing them to the painted surface. One of the most famous of these preparatory works is not a drawing for a painting that was completed. It is a drawing for a painting that remained, for various reasons, at a particular stage. The work is known as the Burlington House cartoon, held at the National Gallery in London. It is a large drawing in charcoal on paper, showing the Virgin Mary, her mother Anne, the infant Jesus, and the young John the Baptist, arranged in a close and intimate group. A reproduction of this work is mounted here, printed at approximately the original scale, which is large, over 1.5 meters tall. Standing before it, the scale of the thing is immediately apparent. These are life-size figures drawn with extraordinary softness in charcoal, their forms emerging from the warm paper in a way that seems almost sculptural. The faces of Mary and Anne are particularly notable. Both are rendered with that quality of absorbed inner attention that Leonardo achieved in his best work, a sense that something important is happening behind the eyes. Leonardo also made a painting related to this composition, the Virgin of the Rocks, of which there are 2 versions. One is in the Louvre in Paris and one is in the National Gallery in London. The 2 versions differ in certain details, and the full story of how and why 2 versions came to exist has kept scholars occupied for some time. The precise history is still not entirely settled. The painting shows 4 figures in a rocky landscape with a grotto in the background. The infant Jesus, the infant John the Baptist, the Virgin Mary, and an angel. The composition is extraordinarily intimate, the 4 figures close together, connected by a network of gestures and glances that draw the eye in a slow, continuous circuit around the group. The light in this painting is remarkable. It comes from no clearly defined source. It falls on the figures as if diffused through the air itself, picking out the faces and hands with a gentle precision while leaving the surrounding landscape in a soft, atmospheric shadow. The rocky formations in the background are observed with geological precision, the layers of stone and the forms of natural erosion described with the same attention Leonardo brought to the botanical studies and the anatomical drawings. A note near the reproduction of the Louvre version reads that the Virgin of the Rocks is oil on wood panel, that it was painted in the early 1480s and may have been reworked at a later date, and that it is now held in the Louvre in Paris. The second version in London is thought to have been made slightly later, though the dating of both versions is a matter of ongoing scholarly discussion. The two versions differ subtly. The halos, present in the London version, are absent in the Louvre one. The gestures of some figures are slightly changed, and the quality of the two paintings, while both clearly belonging to Leonardo's circle, has led to debate about how much of each was by his own hand and how much by assistants working from his designs. This question of collaboration and workshop practice is important to understanding how Leonardo worked. He was not the kind of artist who sat alone in a silent studio producing everything himself. He had a workshop with assistants who prepared materials, copied compositions, added details under his direction. Some of his paintings are entirely or substantially his own work. Others may have been collaborative productions in which his hand was present primarily in the initial design and the most significant passages. The precise boundaries are often difficult to determine. The room is still and warm. The cream-colored walls give the light a gentle quality that feels appropriate to the careful, patient objects displayed here. Let us walk on. The next room we enter is one that feels different from all the others. A long, low space with comfortable seating along one wall, and on the other wall a series of reproductions that together trace a particular story. This is the room of the later years and the French period. By the end of the 1490s, the world that Leonardo had inhabited in Milan for 17 years had been disrupted. The French invasion of 1499 ended the reign of Ludovico Sforza. The court dissolved. Leonardo left Milan and began a period of itinerant work that would last for nearly 2 decades. He went first to Venice, where he was briefly consulted on military matters relating to a threatened Turkish invasion. He went to Mantua, where he made a portrait drawing of the Marchioness Isabella d'Este, a powerful and cultivated patron who would spend years trying to persuade him to make her an actual painted portrait. He went back to Florence. The years after Milan were years of major work, combined with considerable uncertainty about where to be and who to work for. In Florence, he made early progress on the Mona Lisa and worked on several other paintings and major drawings. He also received from the Florentine government a commission for a large battle painting in the Great Council Hall of the Palazzo Vecchio, a work that would have depicted the Battle of Anghiari and would, by all accounts, from those who saw the full-scale cartoon, have been one of the most ambitious and extraordinary paintings of the period. The cartoon was made and exhibited. It was seen by many of the artists then in Florence, including the young Michelangelo, who was simultaneously working on a competing composition for the same hall. It is widely thought that the two cartoons had a formative influence on a generation of Italian artists. But the painted version of Leonardo's Battle of Anghiari was never completed, and what was painted eventually deteriorated or was covered over. The cartoon itself was lost. What survives are copies and fragments, enough to suggest the scale of the loss. From Florence, Leonardo moved through various locations, back to Milan when the political situation there changed, to Rome, where he spent time at the Vatican under the patronage of Giuliano de' Medici, a period that seems to have been less productive than he had hoped. He mentions in his notes a frustration with not being given enough meaningful work. And then in 1516 or 1517 came the final move. Francis I, the young and ambitious King of France, invited Leonardo to his court in the Loire Valley. He was offered the Château du Clos-Lucé, a small stone manor house at Amboise, close to the royal chateau, as his residence. He was given a generous pension, the title of Premier Painter, and engineer and architect to the king, and, most importantly, considerable freedom to work on whatever interested him. Leonardo was 64 or 65 years old when he made this move. He packed his paintings, including the Mona Lisa and the Saint Anne and the Saint John the Baptist, and his notebooks, and he made the long journey over the Alps into France. He brought with him Francesco Melzi, his loyal companion, an assistant, and a small household. The Château du Clos-Lucé still exists. It is a modest building by royal standards, its exterior walls are pale cream stone, its gardens extending down toward the Loire River. Leonardo lived there for the last 3 years of his life. By some accounts, his right hand had been partially paralyzed by a stroke, limiting his ability to paint with the facility he had once had. But he continued to draw using his left hand, and he continued to fill his notebooks with observations and questions. He worked on architectural and engineering projects for the French king, including a grandiose scheme for a new royal palace and a plan for a network of canals in the Loire region. He organized a court pageant. He received visitors who came from some distance to spend time with the extraordinary old man in the little chateau. Francis I is reported to have visited him regularly and to have valued his conversation with a warmth that seems to have been genuine. The king is said to have been present, or very close by, when Leonardo died on the 2nd of May, 1519. An account written later describes Francis weeping, cradling the dying Leonardo's head in his arms. The account is almost certainly embellished, as such accounts tend to be, but it suggests something true about the regard in which the old painter was held by the young king who had brought him to France. Leonardo was 67 years old at his death. He left his notebooks to Francesco Melzi, who spent years carefully gathering and cataloguing them and preserving them in his family home in Vaprio d'Adda, near Milan. Melzi died in approximately 1570, and after his death the notebooks began their long dispersal. Some were sold by his heirs, who did not fully understand what they were. Some were divided and further divided. They passed through many hands over the following centuries, ending up eventually in the various collections where they now rest. The paintings he left went in different directions. The ones Francis I had acquired became part of the French royal collection, and eventually, after the Revolution, the national collection, the Louvre. Others moved through different hands over the centuries, some eventually finding their way to major museums, others passing through private collections. The room is long and quiet. The reproductions on the wall trace this later part of the story with a few key images: a drawing of the Loire Valley, its river wide and reflective, a reproduction of a painting of the exterior of Clos-Lucé as it appears today, and a late drawing attributed to Leonardo's final years, showing a landscape with water that has the quality of complete and absorbed attention that characterized everything he made, right to the end. Let us sit here for a moment. The seating along the wall is comfortable, the cushions soft and deep. The light in this room is the warmest and lowest of anywhere in the museum tonight. It has the quality of late evening, the last hour of daylight before the dark settles in completely. There is no hurry. The night is very long, and we are in no rush to reach its end. Through the final doorway we enter the last room of the museum. It is the smallest room we have been in tonight. The walls here are a very deep, very soft colour, somewhere between navy and forest, the colour of sky, very late on a summer evening. The lighting is at its absolute lowest. There is only one object here, mounted alone on the far wall, and it is a drawing. It is the red chalk, drawing believed to be a self-portrait of Leonardo in his later years. The original is held in Turin in the Biblioteca Reale. The reproduction here is printed at exactly the original scale on paper that approximates the texture of the original. It is a drawing of a man, probably in his early to middle 60s, with long hair and a full beard, looking directly outward. The face is lined and still, the eyes are open and calm. The expression is without drama, without performance. He has given himself no flattery in this drawing. He has looked at his own face with the same quality of complete, unhurried attention that he brought to water and birds and hands and the structure of the eye and the behavior of light through atmosphere. A small label nearby reads that this drawing is red chalk on paper, attributed to Leonardo da Vinci, dated by most scholars to around 1512, and that it is held at the Biblioteca Reale in Turin. Standing here before this face in the quiet of this last room, it is possible to feel the whole long arc of the life we have walked through tonight. The boy in Tuscany watching the river, the young apprentice in Verrocchio's workshop, the young artist in Florence painting an angel with a quality that surprised everyone including himself, the courtier and engineer in Milan filling notebook pages by lamplight, the patient painter returning again and again to the Mona Lisa across years and decades, the old man in France in a small stone house near a river, still drawing, still asking questions. What you see in this face is not the face of a genius, if by genius we mean someone who existed at a remove from ordinary human experience. What you see is a person who was present, completely, sustainedly present, who looked at things the way most of us would look at them if we had the patience to look long enough, who found that the world always had more in it than the last time he had checked. The notebooks are full of questions he never answered. The paintings he left behind are fewer than you might expect from a working life so long and so productive, and several are unfinished, still waiting for the final layers that would have completed them. The monumental horse was never cast, the battle painting deteriorated, the treatises were never written in their final form. But what remains is extraordinary. The paintings that survive, even the few, even the damaged, the notebooks with their 10,000 pages of questions and observations, the drawings, the anatomical studies, the wing designs, the botanical observations, the portraits, all of it the product of a single quality, the willingness to look. The room is very still and very dark. If you have been with us all the way through tonight, moving through room after room in the low amber light, we are glad of your company. And if you fell asleep somewhere along the way, in the workshop room, or the room of the notebooks, or in the long quiet gallery of the portraits, that is the very best thing that could have happened. The paintings are still here. The notebooks are still full of their patient questions. The face in the red chalk drawing is still looking outward into the quiet dark of this last room. We will leave the museum now, very gently, moving back the way we came. Through the room of the later years, the Loire Valley drawing still on the wall, the late chalk study still attended by its soft, directed light. Through the long corridor of preparatory work, the Burlington House cartoon still emerging from its warm paper in the low glow. Through the room of the Mona Lisa, the figure still seated, still looking outward from behind her soft atmosphere. Through the blue room of the flying machines, the wing drawings still extended in their cases. Through the cool, white room of anatomy, the careful lines on the reproduction pages still precise. Through the room of the notebooks, the mirror script still patient, still legible if you know how to look. Through the amber room of the portraits, the lady with an ermine still turned toward something just outside the frame. Through the great room of the Last Supper, the long table still set, the figures still reacting to words spoken 5 centuries ago. Through the Milan room, the small bronze horse still caught in the moment of its stride. Through the gallery of early paintings, the garden of the Annunciation still quiet and still, the distant mountains still dissolving into haze. Through the terracotta workshop room, the grinding slabs and pigment pots still in their cases. And through the first small room, the sandy walls, the Tuscan landscape drawing on the wall, the river still moving through the valley below the hills. The entrance hall is ahead. The doors are very close. Outside, the night is still and dark, the air cool against the face. Behind us, the museum is going quiet now, one room at a time, the lights lowering slowly and gently from the last room to the first. The face in the red chalk drawing goes dark. The notebooks fold into shadow. The figure at the center of the Last Supper, hands open, goes gently into the dark. The misty landscape behind the Mona Lisa becomes the same color as the night. The drawings of wings and water settle into their cases. The lady with an ermine closes her eyes. One by one, the rooms go quiet, and the museum rests, holding everything it holds, waiting for morning, or for you, whenever you return.